My name is Alexandra, and this is my Planning for Diverse Learners project. This lesson was created to be completed over 2 days at the very beginning of a unit called Diversity of Life in my 6th grade science class. The Diversity of Life unit gives students a foundation of biology while building upon prior knowledge from previous years that they've learned. For my learning objectives, I had 2 content objectives. These were students will be able to determine the characteristics of living things, and students will be able to use evidence from readings, videos, observations, and background knowledge to determine if an object is living or non-living. For listening, students will create a list of characteristics of living things based on classmates' ideas and class discussions. For speaking, students will defend their opinion of an object's living versus non-living status based on background knowledge and observations to classmates. For reading, students will find evidence in a grade level science text to determine and finalize their characteristics of life list. And for writing, students will explain if an object is living or non-living using evidence from their prompt and their characteristics of life list in paragraph form. For this presentation, I wanted to focus on the various activities I used to support my students meeting these learning objectives. The first activity I did was a chalk talk. You can take a look at the picture on this slide to see the example from the class that I based my diverse learners off of. A chalk talk is a strategy to access prior knowledge. Research suggests it is important to activate prior knowledge with diverse learners because of the range of information they bring to the lesson. My students were given the topic of living things and prompted to write whatever they knew about it by writing on the whiteboard. The only rule was they could not speak. This activity is very beneficial for my diverse learners. My students who struggle with anxiety were able to share their opinion without calling attention to themselves and heightening their anxiety. A newcomer in my classroom who struggles with allowing other students to share their knowledge is able to share his knowledge constructively while allowing other students to share as well and building upon others' knowledge. For my students with language, writing, and speech needs, there is less emphasis on correct spelling and more emphasis on their personal knowledge, without having to speak, which encourages them to share as well. The best part of a chalk talk is students find it fun because they get to write on the whiteboard and are engaged in participating and reading what others write, allowing me to assess the class's background knowledge. Another activity that my students completed was sorting the object picture cards seen on the slide. This activity supported their development of the content and speaking objectives of this lesson. Students had to work with partners to complete the activity. While sorting, they had to explain to each other why each object was living, non-living, or undecided instead of simply categorizing each object. If they chose undecided, it meant they needed more evidence in order to decide if it was living or non-living. My newcomer and higher anxiety students have preferential partners. I seat them next to students who almost always demonstrate model behavior when working with a partner. My students with higher anxiety also work with students whom they feel comfortable with to lower their anxiety, especially in this assignment because it is more inquiry-based. I also found this assignment to be very beneficial for my students with language needs. The cards included pictures of each object along with the name of the object below the picture. The students did not have to rely on knowing the name of the object, being able to read the name, or being able to comprehend a text that described the object. They could still demonstrate the content and speaking objectives by using just the pictures and observing what the picture was doing. The emphasis was shifted from reading comprehension to science skills and understanding. They could recall their background knowledge based on the picture while also learning the name of the object, but still determine if it was living or non-living and explain their opinion. Objects that were completely unknown to the students could be put in the undecided pile to be addressed during the class discussion instead of blindly guessing. This benefited my culturally and linguistically diverse students because if they did not have the background knowledge, they were not pressured into creating knowledge of an unknown object on their own. After the partner sort, we held an instructional conversation. During this time, we came to a class consensus of the card sort by discussing the whole class's opinion of an object's living versus non-living status and why they thought that. Students came prepared to the discussion because they had already discussed their opinions with their partners, and they knew what they were going to say, which benefited my students with anxiety and my students with language needs. During this time, we also discussed objects that were not in their background knowledge, and I explicitly taught them what those objects were to support my culturally and linguistically diverse students. After a student defended their opinion, I asked for a nonverbal agreement or disagreement from the class by using thumbs up or thumbs down. This quick comprehension strategy allowed me to check on the comprehension of my non-native speakers and language needs students. In this discussion, students drew conclusions about what makes something living to add to their characteristics of living things list by making observations of commonalities of everything determined to be living. For example, a student might have noticed all of the objects in the living category needed to take in nutrients. That student would then explain to the class what they noticed. We would add this to our living characteristics of living things list and compile a list of all of the characteristics that the students came up with. Thank you for watching my presentation, which highlights my objectives and some of the activities I use to support these objectives.